please take a moment right now to hit like, subscribe, and share.
Especially share. That's the big one.
I grew up in a small town in the Ottawa Valley, and one of the neat things we had back then were actual TV commercials that would promo movies that would run late at night. You might see commercials a few times, reminding you of the cool movie that would be on at 11 p.m. or at midnight on Saturday. This was kind of cool. Of course, this is how I first learned of The Dirty Dozen. It looked like a very interesting film, a bunch of soldiers blasting away at some castle filled with Nazis. From those little clips, this film seemed awesome. Talking to my dad, he seemed very excited about this movie. It was one of his favorites, it turned out, and if I wanted to go to bed early on Saturday, he would wake me up to watch it with him. Of course, I did that. We would do that many times over the years, but I'm certain that the first time we ever did was for The Dirty Dozen. I might have been 7 or 8. I had never seen a film like it before. It was straightforward, but complex. It was intense, but funny. It had characters I shouldn't even like that I couldn't help but cheer for. Could anyone watch this film and not love Franko's rebelliousness? Wladislaw's stoicism, Jefferson's resentment, Jiminez's joie de vivre, Posey's nobility, Pinkley's asinine attempt at impersonating a general? The characters in this film leave a mark. The writing leaves a mark, and the skilled expert direction did as well. It's a great film about not so great people doing a terrible thing for all the right reasons, and I loved it. Dad and I watched it many times over the years, and we geeked out hard when the made-for-TV sequel was announced, especially since it had Lee Marvin and Richard Jackal, 2 decades older, reprising their roles. The sequels weren't as good, of course, but we watched them, smiling and enjoying ourselves all the way through. And by the time Telly Savalas was playing the replacement Reisman character, though, we had lost interest. You just couldn't have the actor who played Maggot leading the team. It didn't work, and it was the worst casting imaginable. And yet someone, somewhere, writing a check for that film thought that would be okay. It wasn't. But a bad sequel never dulls the brilliance of the original, nor should it. And this original shines so brightly, both in my memory and every time I rewatch it, serving as living proof that I love old movies. Hello, film historians. I'm Derek, and I love old movies. We've got Sam the sidekick here.
Hello, and welcome to episode 59, which I'm just going to say is likely to go down as one of our more memorable ones.
Bold words right off the bat. I like it.
It's justified, I'm telling you.
Well, don't just tell me. Tell them.
Well, this week we are discussing one of the films that always pops into my mind first when I think of war movies, The Dirty Dozen from 1967.
Oh, yeah.
This film, despite its preposterous premise, is so well scripted, acted, and directed that you can't help but be drawn in.
Oh, it is a beaut, no doubt about it. It's a movie we both began seeing when we were young, and it stayed with us both. In fact, I'm hard-pressed to think of anyone I've ever watched this film with that didn't love it. I don't want to say too much about it right off the bat, because I don't want to spoil my pros and cons.
I know what you mean, so let's get to it.
Check out the episode description to see how you can follow us on all the socials, listen to us on Pet Rock Radio, and just generally get in touch with us and let us know what you think.
There's so many ways. All the ways.
So, use one of them.
We'd love to hear from you.
So, are you all ready to go blow up a French chateau filled with German officers?
Only if we can do it on the eve of the D-Day invasion. Hit the music.
Robert Aldrich, a director who is called punchy, caustic, macho, and pessimistic, who depicted corruption and evil unflinchingly, helmed his masterpiece, The Dirty Dozen, pretty much in the middle of a career of some hits and some misses. Aldrich seemingly worked everywhere in Hollywood, first with RKO, and Enterprise, in television, and then with Warwick Productions. He went from being a clerk to a production assistant to an in-demand assistant director, and he was building a strong group of contacts among the actors he was working with. Names such as Burt Lancaster, Ernest Borgnine, Lee Marvin, Charles Bronson, and Richard Jackal. He associated with people who were heavily scrutinized and even victimized by the HUAC, but he kept his own name and reputation clean and became known as a director-in-waiting, as his assistant director credits became more and more impressive and numerous, even working with such directors as Charlie Chaplin. An independent film that he produced and directed and helped finance, World for Ransom, caught the attention of Burt Lancaster, who brought Aldrich in to direct 2 films for his company, Hecht Lancaster Productions, most notably the Western hit Vera Cruz. The success of these 2 films led Aldrich to create his own production company, The Associates and Aldrich, which would become the only indie company to eventually have its own production studio in Hollywood. Aldrich began making his own films, exercising a huge deal of creative control, which was a detail he was extremely passionate about, and distributed mostly through United Artists. While films such as Attack and Kiss Me Deadly were very well reviewed and had some critical acclaim, they weren't huge audience hits. Aldrich continued working with other studios as well, making films for Columbia and Hammer during this time, but nothing he was making was really setting the world on fire. That is, until he directed Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, the 1962 hit that rejuvenated Bette Davis and Joan Crawford's careers and earned 5 Academy Award nominations. The success of this film led Aldrich to release a plan to make a total of 8 films using a combined $14 million budget. There were no hits there. But when he went to MGM for the first of 2 films that he made for them, The Dirty Dozen, this was certainly the most successful and popular film of his career. But the successes again set him on a weird and almost doomed pathway. He sold his stake in The Dirty Dozen so he could finance the purchase of his own studio space, as previously mentioned. And then he signed on with ABC Films to make a series of projects. But they did mostly very poorly. And when the relationship between Aldrich and ABC dissolved into lawsuits and debt, Aldrich was forced to sell his studio. Late in his career, he made 2 films with Burt Reynolds, the more successful of the 2 being The Longest Yard. But by the time he was directing Harrison Ford in the comedy western The Frisco Kid, his best days were long behind him, and hopes of another hit had faded at last. A maverick filmmaker in the truest sense of the word, and a critical figure in the rise of American independent film, Robert Aldrich died in 1983 at the age of 65.
The writer is Nunnally Johnson. Johnson's writing career began with him working as a journalist for several different newspapers, as well as writing short stories such as There Ought to Be Law on the side. His introduction to the film industry began in 1927 when he sold the rights to one of his stories, which was then turned into the film Rough House Rosie. He wanted to start writing film criticism in 1932, but Johnson's editor rejected his request, so Johnson moved to Hollywood so that he could be directly involved in films. Once he began writing screenplays, he got a job with 20th Century Fox in 1935. There, he wrote a few films such as Thanks a Million in 1935 and The Man Who Broke the Bank at Monte Carlo in 1935. Before he co-founded International Pictures with William Getz in 1943. Johnson was quite active throughout the early 1940s, writing screenplays for films such as The Moon is Down in 1943, The Kings of the Kingdom in 1944, and The Southerner in 1945. He only released a few films in the late 40s, but he became more active in the early 50s, but still only releasing a couple films each year. The late 50s saw Johnson focus mainly on TV series such as Robert Montgomery Presents in 1955 and How to Marry a Millionaire in 1957. He did, however, experience a sort of late career comeback in the early 60s with films such as Take Her, She's Mine in 1963 and The World of Henry Orient in 1964, before ending his career with 74 writing credits. Most known for his work on The Grapes of Wrath in 1940, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit in 1956, and The Dirty Dozen in 1967, Johnson died in 1977 at the age of 79.
Widely considered a pioneer of American independent film, as he often financed his own films, John Cassavetes was born in New York City in 1929 to a Greek immigrant father and a Greek-American mother. The family moved to Greece in the 1930s, and John's primary language was Greek. However, the family returned to the States after only a few years, and John attempted college in Vermont, being expelled due to poor grades. John then followed the recommendations of several friends and joined them in enrolling at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, bringing Cassavetes back to New York City. Cassavetes found more success in the arts rather than a more academic school, and upon his graduation he began to appear regularly on the stage, even while appearing in small roles in films and television, although he was rejected when he auditioned for the Actors Studio. Cassavetes' first notable film role came in 1955's The Night Holds Terror. He played a villain. His first lead role came in 1957's The Edge of the City, opposite Sidney Poitier, and this film is credited with breaking new ground as it portrayed a working-class interracial friendship. Cassavetes won much critical acclaim for this role, earning comparisons to Marlon Brando, and then he was made a contract actor for MGM. 1958 saw Cassavetes once again break new ground as he directed his very first film, Shadows, which won the Critics' Award at the prestigious Venice Film Festival. John spent the next several years continuing to both act and direct, with him using the money he earned as an actor to finance many of his directing exploits. He made 10 films with his wife, Gina Rowlands, as well as 6 films with his close friend Peter Falk. Cassavetes' final film as a director came in 1986 with Big Trouble. He was not the original director on this film. He stepped in to replace Andrew Bergman. Interestingly, Cassavetes managed to land himself on several very short lists of directors to accomplish something. As of 2007, he is one of only 8 other filmmakers to be nominated for Best Directing, Writing, and Acting Oscars. He is one of 6 men to have directed his wife to a Best Actress Oscar nomination, and he appears on one of the stamps of a sheet of 10 USA 37-cent commemorative postage stamps from 2003 celebrating American filmmaking. Cassavetes' stamp honors directing. Cassavetes' health declined in the 1980s, and he finally succumbed to cirrhosis of the liver, which was caused by many years of heavy drinking, in 1989 at the relatively young age of 59.
Born in 1926, R. Jackal, his birth name was simply the initial R, and he adopted the name Richard, enjoyed a career full of film and television roles that spanned 6 decades. At the age of 17, Richard was working as a mailboy for 20th Century Fox when the casting director of the war epic Guadalcanal Diary discovered him. Initially reluctant to act, Richard was finally convinced to accept a key role in the film, thus kicking off his long career in front of cameras. He played every role, from babyface teens to soldiers and killers with ease. During the Second World War, Richard enlisted and served in the Navy for 4 years, and the first film he did upon his discharge was co-starring with John Wayne in Sands of Iwo Jima in 1949. He had a prolific movie career, appearing in over 70 films, earning him accolades and critics' notice, including an Oscar nomination for 1970's Sometimes a Great Notion. And in 1961, he began adding extensive television work to add to his film credits, including reprising his standout performance as Sergeant Bowron for a made-for-TV sequel to 1967's The Dirty Dozen. His television roles included a 3-year stint in the early 1990s on the hugely successful show Baywatch. Somehow, despite his very lauded and long list of credits, Richard does not yet have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, an oversight we hope is corrected one day soon. 1994 was a rough year for Richard, as he lost his home in Brentwood, California, due to his declaring bankruptcy, and moved into the Motion Picture and Television Hospital, where he remained for the next 3 years. Known as a longtime health and exercise aficionado and a non-smoker, Richard was an incredibly avid surfer. The long time he spent in the sun, coupled with his natural fairness, are the reasons blamed for his skin cancer diagnosis in 1994, which led to his death in 1997.
Loaded with a cast of real-life Army, Navy, and Air Force veterans, and with a director as talented as he was cynical, The Dirty Dozen went from being an interesting idea on paper, basing a film on a book based on the real-life exploits of the Filthy 13 Commando Unit, but turning the characters into prisoners and sociopaths. And as strong as the cast was, It might have been even more so had the original choices for Reisman and Maggot been cast.
Who did they want instead?
So MGM wanted John Wayne as Reisman and Jack Palance as Maggot, but both had fundamental problems with the characters as presented in the script. Wayne objected to early versions of the script that suggested Reisman was having an affair with a married woman, and Palance wanted the racism aspect removed from Maggot's character. These objections led Aldrich to go in a different direction, casting Lee Marvin and Telly Savalas instead.
As much as I love John Wayne,
And you do.
I can't see him as Reisman.
No.
The way Lee Marvin channels the cynicism of the character and pushes the rock up the hill despite the futility. The way he really makes himself seem as much as one of the dozen as the rest of them, without ever sacrificing his authority or credibility. I just couldn't see John Wayne pulling that off.
Totally agree. And I'm not really one for Jack Palance. He always feels hammy and over the top to me, which I suppose might have worked for Maggot, as it's not like Savalas played the character with any restraint whatsoever, but it would be a hard switch to imagine improving the film.
You had this weird casting idea, though. You were telling me if you could replace one actor, you had an idea for that.
I did, yeah, and I feel pretty confident about it. But then we watched the film again, and I sort of softened my position.
Well, fess up. Who was it?
Okay, so the character I was thinking of was Sergeant Bowron, the MP officer who's attached to Reisman and the prisoners. I really like the character a lot, and seeing the film again, honestly, Richard Jackal knocks it out of the park. He nails the character, making him legitimate and worthy. He's a great foil for Reisman and for the dozen.
So who would you have replaced him with?
Well, bear with me on this one. Hear me out. Bowron has to be almost unimpeachable. He has to be a top soldier, a model of what the others are trying to become, see?
Sure.
So you cast him with America's most famous and decorated soldier, Audie Murphy.
I don't hate that.
Now, Richard Jackal is great. Perfect, let's say. The role is his, and no one could do it better. And he's a much better screen actor than Murphy was. But the legitimacy that Audie Murphy could have brought to the role would have been great. His career wasn't doing so well by then, so I could see him not even being on the radar for a big budget studio production like this one. But man, if he was ever going to have one truly great role, this could have been the one.
Maybe. It's an interesting thought. But back to the film for a moment. It was a hit, right? Like a big hit?
Oh, totally. Financial returns were impressive, with the film turning in a major profit only 5 weeks after release. It was one of the top grossing films of its year, and was at the time one of the fastest grossing films of all time, despite not becoming the weekly box office king until its 6th week of release.
That's so weird. You don't get a lot of films these days hitting #1 that deep into their theater run.
Well, releases worked differently then. You didn't have multiplexes, and pre-internet word of mouth took a lot longer to spread.
But reviews found it a bit violent, fair to say?
Well, the climax was a bit much for the faint of heart, with helpless officers and many civilians being blown up and burned to death. It was certainly something that people hadn't seen before.
And this is an influential film, would you say?
In its own way, sure. Definitely there are a few films that followed the formula of turning criminals into soldiers, such as Play Dirty and the original Inglourious Basterds. Even the Tarantino one that uses that title is maybe in some ways a spiritual successor. But the influence doesn't stop at other war films. The Suicide Squad in DC Comics also follows a similar model. Not the original version of the Squad as published in 1959, which were clearly good characters in bad situations, but from the mid-1980s onward, when the group was reimagined as supervillains, being recruited out of jails to go on one-way black ops missions in exchange for a chance at freedom. A review from the Time Out Film Guide really drives home some interesting points about the film and its director. Here's a quote from that. Aldrich sets up dispensable characters with no past and no future, as Marvin retrieves a bunch of death row prisoners, forges them into a tough fighting unit, and leads them on a suicide mission into Nazi France. Apart from the values of team spirit, cudgeled by Marvin into his dropout group, Aldrich appears to be against everything. Anti-military, anti-establishment, anti-women, anti-religion, anti-culture, anti-life. Overriding such nihilism is the super crudity of Aldrich's energy and his humor, sufficiently cynical to suggest that this whole thing is a game anyway. a spectacle that demands an audience. That sums up the Dirty Dozen perhaps better than anything else could. What's the tail of the tape on this one, Sam?
Okay, so we have a 7.7 on IMDb.
Mm-hmm.
The audience score is 90% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yes.
And the tomato meter is 81%.
Mm-hmm.
The film won an Academy Award for Best Sound Effects and was nominated for Academy Awards for Best Film Editing, Sound, and Actor in a Supporting Role. The film can be rented in the Microsoft Store or in Amazon Prime Video.
In spring of 1944, a troublesome and insubordinate Major Reisman is assigned an impossible task. Train 12 prisoners in commando techniques in a short time span to attack a French chateau on the eve of D-Day, with the goal being killing as many German officers as possible and disrupting the chain of command during the invasion.
The prisoners are a terrible lot of murderers, thieves, and rapists, but they will be granted amnesty if they survive the mission, which is unlikely, but still. Reisman is assisted by a team of MPs led by Sergeant Bowron and provides intensive training, molding the prisoners into a lean, mean, highly coordinated fighting unit.
Rebelling against some aspects of their training conditions, the prisoners, led by Franko, decide to stop bathing and shaving as a form of protest. This gives the unit their name. And subsequent psychological analysis of the men suggests that they all have a built-in resentment of authority and are as likely to kill Reisman as the Germans.
Near the end of their training, the dozen must attend parachute jump school, which is run by Reisman's nemesis, Colonel Breed. The dozen mock Breed and his men by having Pinkley impersonate a general. This leads to Breed leading a raid on the dozen's camp.
Reisman and his men get the better of Breed and his soldiers, but disciplinary action for Reisman is forthcoming. He makes a deal with General Worden that if the dozen can capture Breed's divisional headquarters in the upcoming war games, they will not be sent back to jail and their mission can continue.
The dozen, operating as an independent unit, use very unorthodox techniques and succeed in their mission, which allows their mission to be re-greenlit, and after a last supper, make their way to France.
Their mission starts off terribly, with Jiminez breaking his neck in the jump, and the team needing to rejig their plans. 8. Gilpin's got a date. Wladislaw and Reisman infiltrate the chateau while the rest of the team set up defensive points and prepare for the assault.
The plan further falls into disarray when Maggot goes off script, killing a German woman and shooting at Jefferson, raising the alarm long before it should be raised. Jefferson improvised, machine gunning Maggot while the rest of the team goes into action.
The German officers are herded into an underground bunker, while the dozen plan to blow the whole place up using grenades, gasoline, and the fortunate positioning of an ammo dump. Team members fall fast, with Gilpin, Pinkley, and Vladik falling in battle. Posey and Bravos hold the line at the crossroads until they too fall.
As Jefferson tries to set off the explosions, the squad goes into full escape mode. Lever, Sawyer, Jefferson, and Franko are all killed, but the explosions go off and the mission is a success. Wounded but still able to fight, Reisman, Wladislaw, and Bowron manage to get away in a stolen half-track.
The three men are next seen in a military hospital, and we hear a voiceover telling us that the 11 members of the dozen who died did so in the line of duty. Reisman and Wladislaw are commended by the generals, but are barely able to hide their disdain for the honor.
The end.
So let's pro and con this guy.
Let's get to it.
Okay, so as usual, we don't actually rate films here on the show. There's no thumbs, there's no stars. We just talk about a few things we liked.
Some things we didn't.
And then we recommend whether or not you might enjoy giving this one a watch.
Take it away.
My pros. Number 1, the cast. In The Wild Bunch, you have Ernest Borgnine and Robert Ryan. Magnificent performers, both of them, and they're playing leads. And here, they're supporting characters, tertiary characters. That's how deep this cast is. Lee Marvin is the centerpiece of this incredible ensemble cast filled with established stars, up-and-comers, and steady hands. Obviously, some characters are better written than others, but everyone does their job and makes their performance memorable. But more on that in a moment. Number 2, the characters. I feel there are so many stories that can be told about all of these guys. This is a highly compelling crew of misfits and sociopaths that I would love to know even more about. Why do Breed and Reisman hate each other so much? What sort of hijinks did Reisman get up to that had General Worden so down on him? How did an MP like Bowron also get to be such a highly capable combat soldier? What exploits led to Wladislaw getting promoted to lieutenant? How was Franko's life in the Chicago mob? These are really interesting characters with amazing backstories that we only get teased with, but it makes us invest in them and care about them, and ultimately, when we must, grieve them. Number 3, Lee Marvin. Is he ever better than he is in this movie? Seriously, if there's a better Lee Marvin movie, a better performance, a better character, let me know. Number 4, the action scenes. This movie is a slow boil, building to a final act that is all out action and tension. And once the shooting starts, we get a battle scene worthy of any war film. And we see what a fantastically capable combat unit the Dozen have become. They were soldiers, despite their shortcoming. There's an amazing moment in the film when the Dozen are having their last supper and are reciting their battle plan, and they're all loose and relaxed, and the scene shifts to them being on the plane in full battle gear waiting to drop, and they're still reciting, but the mood has changed. They are tense and tentative and afraid. It's a masterful transition, ramping up the tension and the stakes without changing the action of the characters. It's just a really nice bit of filmmaking that prepares the audience for the carnage and horror coming up. Number 5, the humor. This is a funny movie. There's a lot of great one-liners in the film, all delivered with stone-faced earnestness. Suppose I said happiness. You might say children. I wouldn't say that. It's amazing. Where we have incorrigible individuals facing an impossible task with the ultimate stakes on the line, that we can find moments to laugh at the situation, and with the characters, it's really welcome. It's hard to make movies with grim concepts legitimately funny in places, but this film does it. Perhaps the concept of the Dirty Dozen is just too ridiculous, and the characters too charming that the laughs come so easily. Or maybe the tension just needs the relief. Either way, this film will make you laugh. Cons. Number 1, the needlessly complicated plans during the war games, including sending some of the members of the team down a hill during a live fire barrage. Why even do that when they were just meeting up with people already at the bottom of the hill? It made no sense. And further to that, during the war games, why wouldn't Reisman have been working with his unit in a commanding officer capacity? It just didn't add up. Number 2, it would have been nice to have seen one of the more ignoble members of the Dozen survive, just to see how the army would have handled the idea of a Maggot, or a Bravos, or a Franko, or a Gilpin survive and receive their amnesty. The ethical questionability of the entire operation is predicated on what if these awful assholes actually survive and are reinstated. It would have been nice to have seen that at the end. Just one of them. Prison film, war film, caper movie, ensemble film, The Dirty Dozen checks many boxes. While certainly more in the war is fun genre than the war is hell side of things, the undeniable charm of this film is of the sort that draws you in time and again. I have seen this film, no pun intended, dozens of times, and I will watch it dozens more. There is just so much here to be entertained by. Is it a great and realistic recreation of military life in World War II? Of course not. But is it an extremely entertaining and engaging war movie? You bet. It's just artistic enough to feel oddly highbrow in places with its curious high-angle shots and extensive use of framing as a mise-en-scène tool. And it's great escapism with its high-concept plot and Nazi-destroying wish fulfillment. And it's a great character movie with everyone getting moments to shine. Even the secondary and tertiary characters, not just the Dozen. The Dirty Dozen is absolutely one of my favorite war films of all time and is quite likely in my top 10 films overall. It's that enjoyable. It's that entertaining. Watch it. And may it never be remade. You're up.
Okay, so my pros. 1. The war games. They were so much fun. The plan was so clever and smart. The Dirty Dozen were all working together like an actual team, which was incredible. Honestly, the teamwork they showed here was my favorite part of the war games bit. And the best part is that Ernest Borgnine's character figures out some of what is happening and just lets it happen. The look on his face as he pieces things together is hilarious. Honestly, this whole part of the movie is super exciting and just a lot of fun to watch. 2. The performances. First of all, what a stacked cast. Lee Marvin, John Cassavetes, Charles Bronson, and a bunch more. It's insane how many great actors and big names they got for this film. They all put in such awesome performances. I instantly loved all the characters. They were so believable. I found myself so immersed in the story, I didn't even realize that the film was almost over. I just wanted to keep watching. I want to know more about everyone's lives and backstories. They were all so great. I found it difficult to focus on only one thing in a scene because I wanted to watch everyone. 3. Franko. Yes, I know. He was a murderer, an asshole, and just generally awful. But still, he was such a fun character. He was always the first to do something, like talk back to Reisman. Part of why I liked him so much is the fact that he was just an unlikable jerk. Plus, John Cassavetes is an awesome actor and was amazing in this role. Something about him just really drew me in and made me pay attention to him whenever he was on screen. So, yeah, Franko was awesome and absolutely my favorite character. Now my cons. 1. The off-screen deaths. These were so uncool. I get that not all of the Dirty Dozen get as much screen time as others, and some are clearly supposed to be the main ones, I guess. But still. They are all super important when they are there, and they all make big impacts to the story. Like, I understand that Trini Lopez had to leave the production so he got an earlier death, but they could have handled it better or in a more fair way. I just feel like all those guys are important enough that none of them should have had off-screen deaths. 2. Bowron at the final mission. So, the thing is, I loved him. He was a super great character, and I loved everything he did. But he was a little much in the actual final mission. He was an MP, which is basically like a sort of police officer dude. There is absolutely no way an MP would be part of their mission beyond the stuff he did at the training camp. And he was really competent, too. Like, what MP is getting so much action that he can be so great and reliable and efficient during an undercover mission like that? It doesn't make any sense. And that's all. Oh, man. This movie. It's so good. The cast is great. The acting is great. The story is awesome. The script is filled with amazing dialogue and hilarious one-liners. They're beautiful shots with really interesting camera angles and exciting action scenes. It has everything. What more could you ask for? I've seen this one multiple times now, and I feel like it gets better every time I watch it, as I catch small things or lines I've missed before. And I feel like I've been saying this a lot recently, but this is one of my favorite movies. I love this film so much, and you should too. So 1000%, yes, please watch it.
And there we have it. Double watch recommendation for one of the most entertaining war films from the 1960s. No surprise, really.
Yeah, this is one we both went in already loving, already having such strong feelings about. It makes sense that we would recommend it. The other thing is, too, with films like this that we just flat out love, being critical of them is hard.
That is true. You want to be objective and call out the crap where you see it, but it's a lot harder to find, and then you feel like you're betraying your own emotional connection to the film when you start getting too critical.
It's a fine line.
So fine. A razor's edge, as it were.
As it were, sir.
Well, it's a problem you and I won't have on our next show because
I won't be on it.
No, you're going to be landing squarely in the middle of exam time when our next episode hits, so Nikki is going to be filling in for you, and that episode should hit around December 12th.
Mom did a good job last time,
Oh, yeah.
so I'm sure it'll be a great episode. And I will see you all sometime after that. We'll probably do some sort of special episodes over the holidays. But until then, be sure to watch more movies.
And be sure to spread the word about our podcast. We're not a secret, and you don't have to keep us all to yourselves.
So tell your friends.
Tell your enemies.
You never know. They might like blowing up Nazis as much as you do.
Maybe even more. For Sam the Sidekick, I'm Derek, and I love old movies. Additional research for I Love Old Movies, the podcast, is done by Nikki Weatherden. Audio clips come from freefx.co.uk. Images are used through the provisions of fair use, and our theme song, Burning Bridges, is by The Crocs.